So this time from the Toy Biz Marvel Legends Series 9, the Galactus wave, taking a look at Professor X. Well, first we'll take a look at the back of the package here. You can see the stats and a little write-up here. The rest of the figures in the wave, as well as the Build-A-Figure. Now, Professor X has two accessories, the major one being the obvious wheelchair. He also has this little Cerebro helmet on. We'll take a look at that later, but we'll first take a closer look at the wheelchair. And he sits in the wheelchair. He gets pegged in by the feet, and in the back section here, he's got two holes and two pegs here. Lean him up here. Now this chair is a reuse of the chair from... The wheelchair is a complete reuse of the wheelchair that Toy Biz used in their line of toys for the first X-Men movie. But it is minus some of the features that the original chair had. You might notice here this hole here. The original had a lever in the back which was connected to the Professor X figure, and the action figure would be that he would raise his hand like this, like he was activating his mental power. This figure does not have that gimmick, so that's why it remains. And the other gimmick that the chair had was these wheels here. You would pull this in a backwards direction, and it would wind up a motor here that you would, once release, would propel the chair forward. And you can tell that that whole motor system has been removed. Now his other accessory here is the Cerebro helmet, which will amplify his powers, very much like the movie version of the Cerebro helmet. Pretty nicely designed here. So getting into the figure itself, it's a pretty nice sculpt. Has some great details with the jacket and suit. You see the buttons on it and pockets on both the vest and on the outside of the suit. Nicely painted details on the tie. Some nicely detailed shoes. Very shiny, glossy paint to make him look like he's got very shiny shoes. Pretty good face and head sculpt there. You can see some of the seams here in the plastic, but it's not too bad. Nicely painted. And in terms of articulation, he's got the head, as you saw, up and down. Mine's very loose. I think that's more of a factor of age than the way the figure is made. But you can see it goes left and right and up and down. His arms do go all the way around and out. That far because of the way they're sculpted at the shoulder. Rotates at the bicep. Got a double joint at the elbow. Rotates at the wrist and bends at the wrist as well, and his fingers are articulated together. Only waist articulation. He's got some ball joints that are very reminiscent of the way Hasbro does the Marvel Legends now, in that they're really, you kind of have to manipulate both the joint here and the thigh joint to get him into sitting positions. But it works quite well for this figure, since primarily he's going to be sitting down. Rotates at the thigh. He has got a double knee joint. He rotates at the lower calf here. And his feet do bend forward and back, and they have a little ankle pivot as well as a toe joint. Professor X, of course, first appears in X-Men #1, 1963. So his father, Brian Xavier, was a nuclear scientist and industrialist, and he went into business with his best friend, Kurt Marco. Going back to during the war, World War II, when they worked on the Manhattan Project together. So Brian dies in an accident, and Kurt Marco kind of comforts his wife Sharon, and eventually they start a relationship. He moves in to the Xavier household alongside his son Kane Marco. He may have had good intentions at first, but he quickly becomes sort of insecure about his worth and the fact that he's living off of his friend and his legacy, his wife, and so he starts neglecting Sharon, and he takes a lot out on his son Kane, who then visits his rage of his father upon Charles. Charles kind of maybe feels like he sort of deserves it. It's because his powers emerge, and he can read the thoughts of both. So he kind of endures this hell that is dished out in the Xavier household. And it comes to a boiling point when his mother, Sharon, dies. There's a big blowout between Kurt and him, and I guess Kurt has got some experiments brewing at home. Maybe it's at his office. I'm not sure. But there's an explosion, and both Kane and Charles are there, and Kurt manages to save both of them. However, succumbing to fumes or what have you, dies in the attempt, and so he kind of redeems himself at the end. And his powers and natural smarts really make him a top student, because when you think about it, having psychic powers, being able to read minds, to do well in school, all you would have to do is just read the teacher's mind. You would have all the answers right then. Because of the character, it's not just his powers, but his regular, I guess, brain that allow him to graduate from, I think it's Harvard, at 16, and after Harvard he goes into many different fields of study in graduate schools: genetics, biophysics, psychology. It's at Oxford where he meets fellow genetics grad student Moira Kinross. Now, genetics was just cutting edge at the time. I mean, Watson and Crick first discovered DNA. I think it was 53. Well, DNA was always there, but they managed to crack the DNA codes in 53. So anyway, he meets Moira Kinross and falls in love with her, and they become engaged. And unfortunately, the Korean War happens about the same time, and he's drafted. He gets a reputation for performing these great search and rescue operations because he's using his power, of course, to help out. Eventually, he comes in contact with his stepbrother, Kane, and they both stumble into this temple where Kane finds the Crimson Ruby of Sidorak and becomes the Juggernaut. At the same time, he unfortunately receives a Dear John letter from Moira in Scotland, who has decided that she's going to marry a Scottish lord by the name of MacTaggart. So after his stint in the Korean War, he's kind of traveling all over the place. He meets Aurora, or Storm, as a little girl, and also runs into his first evil mutant, the Shadow King / Amal Farak, who I guess was his identity at the time, and engages in a battle on the astral plane, pure psychic battle, and just barely manages to win. Realizes then creating a force of good mutants to battle those who would abuse their powers and take advantage of the weak might not be a bad idea. He goes to Israel and he meets up with Eric Lencher, who would become Magneto. So there he is helping survivors of the Holocaust. In particular, a catatonic woman by the name of Gabrielle Haller. It just happens that she knows where a bunch of hidden Nazi gold is, and Baron Strucker comes after her, and he and Eric Lencher defend her. Magneto, Eric Lencher, realizes that he's going to have to use force to secure rights for mutants. Leaves Charles with the opposite effect, prove that mutants are not a threat. Xavier is still traveling around somewhere in the Himalayas, and runs into this being that calls himself Lucifer, and who turns out to be a scout for an alien invasion, and Xavier manages to stop this guy's plot, but this guy drops a rock on his legs, and that's where he becomes crippled. And so when he comes back to the state, he starts to gather his students for the Xavier School of Gifted Youngsters, or whatever it's called. Obviously using a boarding school type atmosphere as cover for his X-Men. Somehow he develops ties to the FBI and the government, and he is also, in this time, develops himself as a worldwide authority on the topic of mutants, and superpowered mutants in particular. So the X-Men form, and he's has a couple of years. He is replaced by the Changeling at one point, who has an agreement with Xavier to take his place while he sequesters himself in trying to prevent an alien attack. And the Changeling, as Xavier, possesses a limited amount of psychic power that Xavier somehow transfers to him. Unfortunately, the Changeling dies, still in the guise of Professor Xavier, and the X-Men are kind of disbanded for a little bit. Professor Xavier comes back, and they realize what had happened. And soon after that, the team investigates the living island of Krakoa and disappears, and Xavier once again goes out recruiting, picking up his all new, all different X-Men. He manages to make contact with the princess of the Shi'ar Empire, Princess Lilandra, forms this sort of psychic rapport with her over the cosmos, and this eventually, over the years, blossoms into a romance of sorts. He becomes her consort when he believes the X-Men to have died in a battle against Magneto. Soon after that, he becomes infected by one of the alien brood race. It's during that time when he gathers the new class of mutants, the New Mutants. Brood inside of him is about to take over his body, and the Shi'ar come to Earth and say, well, you know, we'll just give you a clone body. So he transfers his mind into a clone body, and that clone body is able to walk. So he has, at that point, regained the ability to walk again. He then finds out that Gabriel Haller has produced a son, David Haller, or Legion, and he has so many powers that he has invented personalities for each power. Once again, Xavier leaves Earth when he's injured by the Strucker twins, calling themselves Fenris, and he goes off to Shi'ar space to heal, and he leaves the X-Men and New Mutants in the care of Magneto, giving him sort of a second chance to atone for his past misdeeds. However, it doesn't take with Magneto, and he soon reverts to his more extremist ways. When Magneto rips out the adamantium from Wolverine's body, Xavier uses his mental powers to shut Magneto's mind down. That leads to the inadvertent creation of the being known as Onslaught, because evil part of Magneto, I guess, festers in Xavier's own dark side, and comes to being as Onslaught. He hung out with a squad of mutant Skrulls for a while in space, training them how to use their powers. He had, in the Grant Morrison series, I guess, I guess it's canon, but he had this, I still really don't understand how, he had this mental twin called Cassandra Nova that eventually became physical and real, and took over his identity for a while, and I don't know. I wasn't reading X-Men at that time, so a lot of this stuff I'm fuzzy on. I know a little bit, but in the decimation from the Scarlet Witch, he's one of the mutants who loses his power, gets it back when he goes off to deal with the returned Summers brother, Vulcan, and he encounters the Macran crystal, which has reality-changing properties, and he gets his telepathy back. Then, when he returns to Earth, he's captured by Osborn, Norman Osborn, and held while Mystique impersonates him on TV, calling for a new Hammer-controlled X-Men, or the Dark X-Men. And of course, after that, he's saved by the regular X-Men, and he's sort of taken out of control of the X-Men and has relegated it to Scott. really taken a back seat, being more like the figurehead instead of the driving force. He's still there, but he's been pushed to the background. I've gone on for so long about this guy. They've done tons and tons of stuff with him, and there's not much else to do. That'll be it for Professor Xavier, and stay tuned for some more Marvel Legends reviews, and until next time, I'll see you.